Welcome to this explainer. Today we're literally decoding the invisible psychological strings that connect us to media figures. These are the unseen forces shaping our scrolling habits, our politics, and honestly, our impending future in virtual reality. We're going to look at exactly how we form these one-sided bonds, why they matter so much to our daily lives, and what happens when the screens we watch them on disappear entirely. So let me kick things off with a slightly weird question for you. Do you have an imaginary friend? And no, I don't mean a childhood companion. I mean a podcaster, a YouTuber, a TV host, or even a political figure that you feel incredibly close to, despite literally never having met them in real life. Well, if you just answered yes, you are far from alone. In fact, you're participating in a very well-documented psychological phenomenon. Right. So communication researchers have been studying this all the way back since the 1950s, and they basically split these bonds into two distinct categories. First up, we've got parasocial interactions, or PSIs. These happen while you're actively watching or listening to a piece of media. It's that immediate feeling of engagement right in the moment. But then we have parasocial relationships, or PSRs. Now, these are the enduring connections that live rent-free in your head long after you turn the screen off. It's kind of like the difference between laughing at a joke a host makes while you're watching, and then, wondering what that exact same host would think about a news story you read 3 days later. And this perfectly illustrates how these relationships grow through what researchers call imagined interactions. Think of it as a type of functional daydreaming. You mentally run ideas by these media figures as if they were sitting right there in the room with you. You're creating cognitive scripts in your head. You might think, oh, if I told this YouTuber about my awful day, they'd probably say this, based entirely on their public persona. It's basically a way our brains practice social situations just using media figures instead of our next-door neighbors.
Section 1. The psychology behind the screen.
Okay, so let's see how this builds into the specific psychological functions these one-sided relationships serve in our everyday lives. Because the absolutely crucial point here is that these imaginary bonds aren't just quirky habits. They serve highly functional purposes for us. For instance, we use them for compensation, literally making up for a lack of real-life human interaction when we're feeling lonely. We use them for rehearsal, practicing our own arguments or conversations in our heads. And we use them for catharsis, which is that sense of emotional release or relief. When you're stressed out, tuning in to a familiar, friendly voice can genuinely relieve social tension. So yeah, these parasocial relationships are doing some real heavy lifting for our mental states.
Section 2. Politics, media, and credibility. To see how these psychological functions actively predict real-world behavior, let's dive into some objective data from two really fascinating high-profile media case studies. Our first data set looks at President Donald Trump. Specifically, researchers examined his highly aggressive integration of Twitter to communicate directly with audiences during his presidency. They wanted to explore which specific parasocial functions led his audience to more deeply integrate social media into their own daily routines. Researchers call this social media use integration. Basically, they asked, why did following him make people use social media more heavily in their own everyday lives? Now, the research showed something super interesting. Regardless of an individual's personal opinions or political alignments, the desire for catharsis was a consistent, significant predictor of their social media use integration regarding Trump. Viewers were literally using their one-sided relationship with him as a way to relieve anxiety or find an emotional release. And that strong desire for catharsis is what drove them to search for related content and embed social media much deeper into their own daily habits.
For our second case study, researchers neutrally examined the controversial InfoWars host Alex Jones. Jones is a widely recognized source of alternative media, and researchers wanted to figure out exactly what parasocial functions drive people to not just watch him, but to actually perceive alternative, often factually disputed media as highly credible. Like what makes a viewer look at a screen and decide, yes, I trust this person as a news source.
And the data reveals this wild split. Emotional release or catharsis alongside compensation, making up for a lack of real-world interaction, those factors predicted simply viewing his show. But when it came to perceiving him as a credible news source, entirely different functions took over. Specifically, conflict linkage and self-understanding. Conflict linkage means ruminating on negative feelings or conflicts, while self-understanding is about using the media figure to clarify your own internal viewpoints. When viewers used Jones to mentally organize their own conflicts and validate their worldviews, their perception of his credibility skyrocketed. The psychological function literally dictated their level of trust.
Section 3. The virtual reality frontier. All right, having seen how powerful 2D media figures can be in shaping our reality, our habits, and our trust, let's fast forward to right now and beyond. We are escalating rapidly away from traditional flat media. We're moving from 2D screens like our TVs and phones into augmented reality, where digital elements overlap the physical world. From there, it's a quick jump into mixed reality, and ultimately into fully immersive, multisensory environments, immersive virtual reality. As this hardware gets cheaper and more accessible, it's bringing a massive, game-changing shift in how we form these parasocial bonds.
Now, we absolutely have to separate the technology from the psychology here. Immersion is strictly about the technical hardware, the headset, the haptic feedback, the surround sound, the whole shebang. But presence is the psychological illusion that you and the avatars you're interacting with are physically sharing the exact same room. It's that gut feeling of being there. And let me tell you, when you genuinely feel like you are physically standing next to a media persona, the parasocial relationship completely transforms. Because VR gives us 360-degree vision and a massive amount of interpersonal cues. We're talking body language, spatial awareness, eye contact. The parasocial attachments formed with virtual characters have the potential to be vastly more intense. We're looking at a heightened sense of embodiment and intense empathy that a flat screen simply can't deliver. When a virtual character literally makes eye contact with you in VR and shares a personal story, those boundaries between a mediated parasocial relationship and a real-life friendship begin to dangerously blur.
Which brings communications researchers to a massive ethical crossroads. As artificial intelligence starts heavily populating these virtual worlds, are we even having parasocial relationships with human beings anymore? What actually happens when a user forms a deep, emotionally reliant bond based on catharsis and self-understanding with an avatar that is entirely driven by AI? The potential for these hyper-realistic digital bonds to influence our psychology is totally unprecedented.
So I'm going to leave you with this final, provocative thought to chew on today. As artificial intelligence and virtual reality seamlessly merge into our daily routines, how will your own psychological need for emotional catharsis, rehearsal, and connection be manipulated when you can't even tell if the persona you're talking to, the one standing right in front of you in your headset, is actually human? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope it gives you a completely new lens through which to view your own digital relationships. Catch you next time.